Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to wait outside. Naomi turned her head slightly, confused but calm. I'm sorry? Amanda, the front desk receptionist at ValonBank's private client wing, didn't blink. She lowered her voice but didn't soften it. This area is for scheduled clients only, and people like you don't usually come through this entrance. There it was. The sentence hung in the cold air of the marble lobby like a slap. Slow, deliberate, disrespectful. Naomi looked the young woman square in the face. Calm, poised, silent. The kind of silence that made people squirm. Amanda didn't squirm. She just gestured toward the door. You'll have to wait by the fountain, outside, in the plaza. What Amanda didn't know was that the woman she just dismissed was the founder of EthicaLedger, the very system this bank used to stay eligible for $1.2 billion in ESG funding. And in exactly 1 minute, everything would begin to unravel. Tell us where you're watching from, and what you'd do if someone told you, you don't belong here. It was 98 degrees outside. The kind of Texas heat that hit you like a wall the moment the doors shut behind you. Naomi stepped onto the concrete and walked slowly toward the Fountain Plaza, the exact place Amanda had told her to wait. No shade, no seating, no regard. Her dark blue linen dress clung slightly to her back. The folder in her hand warmed quickly in the sun, but Naomi didn't flinch. She didn't check her phone. She didn't call her assistant. She just stood there, alone. Inside, behind those thick UV-protected windows, 3 white men were ushered in without question. No one checked their IDs. No one asked them to wait. They were greeted with espresso, smiles, and, Mr. Thomas, it's so good to see you again. Naomi caught every glance from the other side of the glass. She wasn't imagining it. 10 minutes passed. Sweat trickled slowly along her spine. Her eyes locked on the reflection in the window. Her posture was perfect. Her silence, deliberate. She'd been here before, not at this bank, necessarily, but in moments like this. Moments where people assumed she didn't belong, where her skin, her clothes, her quietness all combined into a verdict. Not one of us. What they didn't know, what they never knew, was that Naomi Langston had built the system that kept their entire industry compliant. She was the reason ValonBank had access to ESG funds. The reason Carl Jenkins, their managing director, could stand in front of his shareholders and boast, "We meet every ethical standard in the book." She was the book. And right now she was standing in the sun while Amanda checked the schedule. At 3:09 p.m., the doors hissed open again. A young man in a blue tie stepped out, flustered and squinting. "Miss Langston?" he asked, clearly expecting someone else. Naomi nodded once. "Yes," he blinked. "Apologies. There was, some confusion. Please, follow me." She said nothing, just followed. As they walked past the reception desk again, Amanda avoided eye contact. Naomi didn't give her a second glance, but she saw the embarrassment, not remorse, in Amanda's face. Inside the private client lounge, it was cool, hushed, polished. Leather chairs, walnut walls, glass cases with old bond certificates on display, like relics of respectable finance. The young man gestured to a chair. "Carl Jenkins will be with you shortly. Can I get you anything?" Naomi declined with a soft shake of her head. She sat, crossing her legs slowly, setting her folder down gently. Nobody knew it yet, but this was no longer a routine meeting. From the far corner, she overheard the whisper. 2 staff members behind the desk. "Keep an eye on that woman. Let me know if she tries anything." That was the moment. Not when she'd been told to wait outside. Not when she watched 3 white men stroll in without interruption. Not even when Amanda looked her in the face and made her feel like a trespasser. No, this, the whisper, was the moment Naomi made her decision. She pulled out her phone and opened EthicaLedger. The private portal only 4 people in the world could access at this level. Her fingerprint unlocked the terminal. 1 tap, 1 scroll, ValonBank, Ethics score 91. Active. A red button below. Initiate ethics freeze protocol. Naomi didn't press it. Not yet. Not here. But it was now an option on the table. And the moment they gave her one more reason, just one more ounce of disrespect, she would pull the pin. 10 minutes passed. Carl Jenkins was still running late. Naomi watched the door, listened to the rhythm of the office. Every moment calculated. Every insult quietly filed away. She leaned back in the chair and looked at the plaque on the wall. Integrity, excellence, trust. It would have been funny if it weren't so pathetic. She took a breath, adjusted her sleeve, and waited. Because the real meeting hadn't even started yet. By the time the conference room door clicked shut behind her, Naomi had already memorized every face in the building that had looked at her sideways. She wasn't keeping score for revenge. She was keeping score to track patterns. That was her entire career, mapping silent failures across systems that were supposed to serve with integrity. Now, the system was personal. The room they placed her in was sleek but intentionally cold. Everything beige and chrome, as if warmth were a liability. A pitcher of water sat untouched in the center of the table. Not a single glass had been set out. Naomi sat in the far corner, the only seat that gave a full view of both the door and the mirror mounted behind her. A mirror she didn't for a second believe was just for decor. She opened her tablet, logged into the internal Langston Capital terminal, masked beneath standard meeting notes. From the outside, it looked like she was reading emails. Inside, she was watching something else. EthicaLedger wasn't just a scoring system. It was a living infrastructure, a network of compliance data fed in real time from institutions all over the country. Behavioral trends, discrimination flags, internal complaint ratios, even keyword tracking in staff emails. Naomi had designed it to be silent, discreet, undeniable. No PR department could sweet-talk a bad score. No quarterly report could bury an ethics violation. Once you dropped below threshold 88, the system automatically flagged you for funding review. And once flagged, you'd be locked out of Langston Capital's ESG pipeline, the very pipeline that brought in $1.2 billion a year across 87 banks. She typed in one phrase, W&A Bank, Austin Branch, Live Ethics Monitor. A dashboard opened. She read the internal interaction log from the past 45 minutes. 2 flagged comments from front desk. She's not on the usual list, looks out of place, probably got lost, or trying to pitch something. 1 denied override request from Amanda. 3 ID bypasses for white male clients with no appointment logs. It wasn't speculation. It was data. Naomi leaned back and exhaled slowly. Her hand hovered over the override panel. Initiate freeze request, Tier 1 lockdown. She didn't press it. Not yet. Carl Jenkins finally entered the room at 3:24 p.m. No apology, no handshake, just a curt nod as he pulled out his chair, tapping a folder on the table like he was doing her a favor. "Ms. Langston," he said, "thanks for waiting." Naomi smiled softly. "Of course." He glanced at the folder. "We've reviewed your ESG structuring model. It's interesting, ambitious, but I do have some questions." She let him talk. Let him walk straight into his comfort zone, the zone where he assumed he was smarter, in charge, justified in speaking down to her. He flipped through pages like a man who'd already made up his mind. He asked questions he could have answered himself. He said your firm, like she wasn't the founder. He referred to her proposed fund structure as risky for institutional alignment. What he meant was, you're asking us to fund social justice projects with our nice, clean, privileged money. Naomi waited until he was done. Then she folded her hands. "Carl, may I ask you something?" He looked up, caught off guard. "Sure." "Before I walked in this room, had you read any of this?" she asked, tapping the packet. He blinked. "I skimmed. Did you know who I was?" A beat of silence. "I mean, I knew Langston Capital. Didn't expect the, visit to be in person." Naomi tilted her head slightly. "The woman you made wait in the sun. The one your staff dismissed, ignored, and flagged as a risk. That's the same woman who built the compliance system your bank relies on for its ESG funding access. Carl froze. His smile faltered. She let the words settle like concrete. And that system, Naomi continued, her voice even, is watching everything you've done in the last 90 minutes. Carl swallowed hard. Ms. Langston, no need, she said, already reaching for her tablet. One swipe, one confirmation. Ethica freeze protocol activated. The screen blinked. A chain reaction began. At 3:26 p.m., the corporate compliance teams at WNA's New York and Chicago offices received the first red alert. EthicaLedger flag, code 3.1 violation, discrimination behavior detected. At 3:27 p.m., Langston Capital's server pushed a lock signal to WNA's ESG access channel, halting all pending fund transfers. At 3:28 p.m., 3 of WNA's partner banks, ones that shared routing validation via EthicaLedger, were automatically placed under review. At 3:30 p.m., the media team at Langston Capital received authorization to prepare a disclosure statement confirming a Tier 1 ethics violation involving WNA Bank's Austin branch. Carl's phone buzzed, then buzzed again, then lit up like a Christmas tree. He looked at the screen, and then at Naomi. You can't just... Naomi stood, calm as ever. You invited me here to pitch, she said. But the moment I walked through your door, I stopped being a partner. I became a threat, and that's something no policy or press release can undo. Carl opened his mouth, but she cut him off. This wasn't personal, Carl, but your behavior made it systemic. She slid her card across the table, the real one this time. Black foil embossed with 2 words. Naomi Langston, Final Authority. EthicaLedger. Outside the building, the sun still burned across the glass. But inside, a storm had started. And it wasn't just about Naomi anymore. At exactly 3:34 p.m., Carl Jenkins was still staring at his phone like it had betrayed him. Naomi had left the conference room 6 minutes ago, calm, composed, not a strand of hair out of place. But what she triggered behind her was anything but calm. Carl's screen showed alerts from legal, compliance, and regional risk, all blinking red. He didn't understand most of it. What the hell was an EthicaLedger Tier 1 freeze? Why were their ESG fund transfers marked as halted indefinitely? He stood frozen in the middle of the room, holding a phone that might as well have been a grenade. And then it rang. Carl, the voice snapped as soon as he picked up. What in God's name is going on in Austin? It was Melissa Wade, head of regulatory compliance for WNA, someone he'd only ever seen on Zoom during mandatory quarterly trainings. Melissa, there was a client meeting. It went sideways. Sideways, she barked. You just triggered a full freeze on $1.2 billion in ESG lines. 6 other banks linked to our ledger just got flagged. I have the CEO of Silvergate calling me personally asking what the hell you did. Carl swallowed. She didn't say who she was. She looked like a walk-in. Amanda thought, let me stop you right there, Melissa snapped. Are you trying to tell me you racially profiled Naomi Langston and kicked her out of our VIP lobby? Carl said nothing. The silence said everything. On the other end of the line, Melissa's breath caught. And then came the killer blow. Carl, do you have any idea who she is? Meanwhile, 6 floors up at WNA's national headquarters, the crisis response unit had just been activated. Screens lit up across a glass-walled control room. The central monitor displayed in bold red, EthicaLedger status, suspended violation code, 3.1, discrimination, systemic. Below that, auto freeze triggered 87 banks under Ethical Access Act review. People were running. IT analysts, compliance lawyers, crisis PR strategists, all talking over each other. Because in less than 10 minutes, Naomi Langston had not only frozen WNA Bank's ESG access, she had kicked off a domino effect that crippled 6 other institutions, all with one button. And now, the industry was watching. By 3:42 p.m., 3 key things had happened. Bloomberg picked up the freeze alert with a breaking headline. Langston Capital triggers ethics lock on WNA, ESG access halted. Silvergate Capital, a key investment partner, paused all new funding rounds with WNA pending clarification. 3 other banks that relied on shared compliance infrastructure with WNA were automatically moved into watchlist status by EthicaLedger's system. Back at the Austin branch, Amanda stood stiffly behind the reception desk, watching a group of suited men and women file in. Naomi wasn't with them, but her presence hung in the air like a thundercloud. One of the women, sharp blazer, tablet in hand, stepped forward. "We're with Langston Capital. Effective immediately, we're conducting an on-site audit of all staff-client interactions for the last 2 hours. We'll need security footage, call logs, and internal access badge data." Amanda paled. A second agent pulled a printed directive from a leather folder and handed it to the branch manager. It was signed with a sleek embossed name, Naomi Langston Final Authority, EthicaLedger Compliance Division. Carl stumbled out of the conference room just in time to see the team enter the executive wing. Wait a second," he called out. "This is a misunderstanding. I had no idea who she was." A woman in a dark suit turned to him, unreadable. "Sir, we're not here to discuss intentions. We're here to document behavior." She handed him a sealed envelope. Immediate suspension notice. Subject: Carl Jenkins, Regional Manager, WNA Bank, Austin. Carl blinked at it. "You're firing me?" "No," the woman said. "Langston Capital is. WNA will follow up with internal decisions shortly." In a side room, Amanda sat down, hands trembling. A younger analyst from Langston Capital leaned across from her. "Can I ask," he said gently, "what made you think she wasn't supposed to be here?" Amanda didn't answer. She couldn't, because the answer was obvious, and now painfully documented. Outside the building, the news trucks had arrived. A small crowd gathered as reporters lined up along the sidewalk, hoping to catch a glimpse of the woman who made $1.2 billion freeze with a single phone call. But Naomi wasn't there. She was already in her car, riding silently in the back seat of a black electric SUV, her assistant beside her quietly scrolling headlines. Naomi said nothing. Her eyes were locked on the skyline as the city blurred past. She didn't need to explain what just happened. She'd built the entire system so she wouldn't have to. At 4:15 p.m., back at Langston Capital's Austin headquarters, a special meeting was called in the 22nd floor executive boardroom. Naomi entered, took her seat at the head of the table, and glanced once at the stack of folders in front of her. Each one had a name: Carl Jenkins, Amanda Lewis. WNA Bank, Ethics History, Silvergate Response, Ethical Access Act, Amendment Review Draft. She didn't speak right away. The team waited. No one dared fill the silence. Finally, Naomi looked up. "We don't respond to ignorance with outrage," she said calmly. "We respond with infrastructure." No one moved. They just nodded. "And today," she continued, "the infrastructure worked exactly as it should." Outside the building, clouds were gathering, not from scandal, but from the ripple effect of quiet power. Banks across the country were now auditing their client experience processes. Compliance departments were rewriting their onboarding policies, and boardrooms full of executives who'd never questioned how bias impacted finance were suddenly paying attention. Because EthicaLedger wasn't just a scorecard anymore. It was the pulse of the industry. And today, it proved what Naomi had always believed. You don't need to shout to be heard. You just need to control the system they depend on. It was 7:02 a.m. in New York when the headline dropped. Black CEO triggers ethics lock on 1.2B bank network. No words, just one button. Underneath it, a photo of Naomi Langston exiting her black SUV in silence, sunglasses on, blazer crisp, a stack of folders in her hand. By 7:07 a.m., it had 9,000 shares. By 7:30, it was on the morning news in 3 states. And by 8:00 a.m., Naomi's name was trending nationally with hashtags like #SilentPower, #EthicsReset, and the one that stuck hardest, as she didn't yell, she rebuilt. Meanwhile, Naomi sat quietly in her 22nd floor office, coffee untouched, watching the markets open. Langston Capital's holdings were steady, but W&A Bank? Down 12% before the opening bell even stopped ringing. Her assistant, Camila, entered holding a media summary packet. "CNBC just requested a live interview," she said. "3 anchors, national spot." Naomi didn't even look up. "Decline." Camila hesitated. "They're offering full editorial control." "I know," Naomi said, finally turning to her. "But we're not in this for airtime. We're in it for reform." Camila nodded, then paused. "Should we put out a statement?" Naomi closed her laptop. "Yes, but not just a press release. By 10 o'clock a.m., the Langston Capital Ethics Office released a formal statement titled, "The Price of Silence is Systemic." A statement from Naomi Langston, founder of EthicaLedger. In it, Naomi laid out not only what happened at W&A, but why it mattered. That systemic bias isn't about bad apples. It's about broken structures. That financial dignity isn't earned by a dress code or skin tone. That 87 banks now under review would be required to complete full ethics recertification under the Ethical Access Act within 30 days. And the line that caught everyone's attention: "I didn't call for their suspension. Their own systems did. I simply built the system they never thought they'd be accountable to." Across the financial sector, you could feel the shake. At Commonwealth Bank, an emergency meeting was called. At Halted Equity, internal memos flew warning of reputational risk from passive discrimination. And at 4 major media outlets, editorial boards scrambled to reframe their Monday morning coverage. Because the story wasn't just "CEO gets disrespected" anymore, it was "Black woman creates ethical earthquake and never raises her voice." By noon, Naomi's office phone hadn't stopped ringing. She answered none of the calls. Instead, she met with her ethics engineering team, a diverse mix of tech developers, lawyers, and systems thinkers who'd spent the last 5 years building EthicaLedger with her from scratch. They were already reviewing thousands of incident reports. "Flag anything with keywords around race, appearance, and delayed service," she instructed. "Not just W&A, all 87 banks, cross-match with badge data." Her voice was steady, professional, but her team could feel it. Something had shifted. Naomi wasn't just reacting to what happened to her, she was reprogramming the industry. Meanwhile, back at W&A Bank's New York HQ, panic had settled into a low, suffocating dread. Legal teams reviewed the footage. Carl Jenkins, Amanda Lewis, and the Austin branch manager were all placed under permanent suspension. Not because Naomi asked for it, but because W&A's internal compliance system flagged the incident as irreparable damage under public protocol visibility. They had no choice. That evening, Naomi arrived at the Women in Finance Global Summit, where she was scheduled to speak on a panel, ironically titled, "The Future of Ethical Capital." At first, she considered canceling, but as she stood backstage, watching the audience file in, mostly older, mostly white, mostly in pressed suits and pearls, she made a decision. She didn't need to call anyone out. She just needed to say what mattered. When the panel moderator finally introduced her, the room fell into a tight silence. Everyone had seen the news. Naomi smiled, adjusted her mic, and began. "I was asked yesterday to wait outside a building. Not because I was late. Not because I didn't belong, but because someone didn't think I looked like someone who should belong." A few gasps. Some uncomfortable shifting in chairs. She continued. "What they didn't realize was that I designed the infrastructure they depend on. And that infrastructure, like any good system, doesn't respond to opinions. It responds to actions." Then she paused, held the room in stillness, and said, "This isn't about vengeance. This is about designing dignity into power. Because if fairness is optional, it's not fairness. It's branding." The applause started slow, but it grew, not into a cheer, but into a long-standing silence, a kind of respect deeper than noise. That night, Naomi walked back to her car, stepping past reporters who didn't dare shout a single question. And as the doors closed behind her, Camilla leaned over and said, almost whispering, "You didn't raise your voice today." Naomi looked at her quietly and replied, "I didn't have to. I just raised the standard." 2 days later, the finance world looked like it had been spun inside out. 4 major banks had already gone into silent compliance mode, wiping all public PR posts off their socials. A 5th, North Point Federal, released a short video with its CEO, a jittery man in his 50s, staring straight into the camera and mumbling something about deep introspection. It got over 1.4 million views. But none of that shook Naomi Langston. What did? A handwritten letter slipped through her office mail. No return address, just a note. "I work in compliance. I've seen how they hide the patterns. I've seen what's done to people like us. If you're serious, I'll show you." Underneath was a burner phone number. Naomi read it 3 times before folding it up and placing it in her drawer. She didn't need anonymous letters to confirm what she already knew. She built EthicaLedger to expose the exact kind of rot that never showed up in quarterly reports. At that moment, across town in a private boardroom at Stonebridge Bank, 6 men in suits were sweating bullets. "We can't afford to be next," said one, tossing down the latest ethics exposure chart. "If we hit non-compliant status, we lose every ESG investor." Another sighed. "We never onboarded the Langston Protocol. Should we now?" A third looked around the room. "Too late. We're already on her radar." Back at Langston Capital, Naomi sat with her general counsel, Renee Abrams, a sharp-tongued legal veteran with 30 years of compliance warfare behind her. Renee pulled up a screen with live audit timelines. 17 banks have submitted initial self-reporting data. 11 flagged at least 1 discriminatory service case in the last 18 months. Naomi raised an eyebrow. "Flagged? Or admitted?" Renee gave her a wry look. "Mostly admitted, under pressure. Some are scrambling. 1 firm in Texas straight up deleted 5 months of client records." Naomi leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen. "So they're sweating." "They're terrified," Renee said. "But don't get too comfortable. Not everyone's rolling over." Naomi nodded. She knew what was coming. Later that afternoon, Camilla stepped in holding a sleek white envelope. "No return address. Hand-delivered." Inside was a formal letter from Linton & Moore, one of the largest banking lobbying firms in the U.S. It read, "Dear Ms. Langston, in light of recent system-wide disruptions, we encourage you to consider the broader economic impact of your platform's enforcement protocols. Our clients are eager to work toward resolution, ideally with a mutual understanding that protects institutional reputation alongside ethical reform. We would welcome a private conversation. Discretion guaranteed." Camilla stared at Naomi. "They want you to back down." Naomi shook her head. "No, they want me to sell them a shortcut." That evening, Naomi met with her inner circle, a 5-person team that helped her design the fail-safe chain, the part of EthicaLedger that kicked in when backroom deals were attempted. "We're activating Protocol Theta," she said flatly. The room went still. Protocol Theta was a database disclosure cascade. Once launched, any organization attempting to bypass public ethics metrics would have their full interaction history exposed to the regulatory archive, accessible to the Office of Federal Accountability and international ESG funds. One of the engineers leaned forward. "This is war-level exposure." Naomi nodded. "Exactly. And they're already playing dirty." Meanwhile, the media landscape was shifting. Instead of just reacting to headlines, now they were asking deeper questions. Why hadn't ethics scores been transparent until now? How much discrimination was buried in customer experience data? Why did it take a black woman CEO to build the system that no one else dared? The Washington Post ran a Sunday cover. "The Langston Effect, Quiet Power and Systemic Earthquakes." And in an op-ed by a retired regulator, one line cut deep. When Naomi Langston was told to wait outside, it wasn't her who didn't belong. It was the system. Days later, Naomi walked into her home office, calm, modern, with warm wood and shelves filled with quiet power, books on behavioral finance, systems theory, and social design. She picked up the burner phone from the drawer, paused, then dialed the number. A man answered, voice low, steady. "You built it to track patterns, right?" "I did," Naomi replied. "Well, I've got one for you. Branch-level bias behavior coded as service deviation. They've renamed racial profiling." Naomi closed her eyes. "You're in the system?" "I was," he said. "Now I'm out, but I took everything with me." Naomi opened her laptop. Then let's see what they thought they could hide. That night, she opened the secure node. A shadow dashboard appeared. Raw logs, unstructured text, redacted identifiers. It was a full copy of internal banking records. And it proved something Naomi had long suspected. Many institutions weren't just biased. They had built standard operating procedures around discretionary delay tactics based on client appearance. And worst of all, they trained it into their AI service tools. Naomi stared at the screen. Her voice didn't rise, but her next sentence would echo into every boardroom in America. "Then we don't just fix behavior," she whispered. "We dismantle the logic." 3 days after Naomi Langston activated Protocol Theta, the first major wave of impact hit. 42 banks, 19 flagged incidents, 9 directly linked to AI-based decision tools. The headlines were sharp, almost surgical. Bias by algorithm, Langston audit uncovers discrimination engineered into bank AIs. You're not too late. Your skin tone is just not white enough. AI tag revealed in bank's own code. And then, the most brutal one. When the system sees a black woman as a threat before she speaks. Naomi sat at her usual glass desk, fingers steepled, reading quietly as the reports rolled in. Across the room, Camilla paced, visibly shaken. "This isn't just unconscious bias," Camilla said. "This is programming, trained behavior." Naomi looked up, her voice like a whisper but sharp as glass. "Exactly. It's not a bug in the system, it's the system." Meanwhile, behind closed doors, a new group was forming. 9 executives, 6 law firms, 4 tech contractors. Their shared fear? One woman, Naomi Langston. They called themselves the Stabilizers. Their goal? To discredit the EthicaLedger system before the audits reached federal regulation. "She's turning every tool we built into a weapon against us," one banker hissed in the emergency Zoom call. "She's turning them into mirrors," a younger exec muttered under his breath, but no one laughed. Back in Austin, Naomi met with her data ethics task force, coders, civil rights lawyers, and policy architects hand-picked over the past 3 years. They gathered around a shared table, laptops open, coffee half drunk, the atmosphere heavy but focused. "Let's be clear," Naomi said. "What we're uncovering now is more than profiling. It's automation of prejudice. We're past human error." Her systems engineer Terrence nodded grimly. Every client marked deferred service had one thing in common. Not profile data, not transaction risk, but image-based metrics tied to visual markers. In other words, facial recognition bias, skin tone scoring. They weren't just skipping black customers. They trained the system not to see them at all. By midday, regulators were circling. The Federal Compliance Oversight Board requested access to EthicaLedger's flagged cases. 3 Senate aides called Naomi's legal team, and 2 foreign finance ministers from Canada and Germany requested briefings on her findings, because those same AI systems were licensed globally. Naomi didn't respond right away. She was busy preparing something else, a document. Not a statement, not a speech, but a proposal. Later that evening, in a private Zoom with 5 senior civil rights leaders and 2 former central bank directors, Naomi presented the first draft of what she called the Langston Framework for Algorithmic Ethics, a 12-point policy standard designed to force banks and fintech firms to audit, disclose, and correct all AI-assisted decision-making involving human profiling. It included mandated transparency for all customer service automation tools, independent review panels led by civil rights technologists, real-time flagging dashboards accessible to the public. One of the older leaders on the call, a retired judge, leaned into the camera and said, "You built this for more than yourself, didn't you?" Naomi paused, then smiled. "They made me wait outside, but I wasn't the only one standing there." But as Naomi's proposal gained traction, the stabilizers struck back. An anonymous article surfaced on a fringe outlet claiming Naomi's system was unregulated, unconstitutional, and driven by personal vendetta. It tried to paint her as an angry activist masquerading as a CEO. The piece was poorly written, but well-funded. It trended for 4 hours before the platform pulled it for misinformation. Naomi didn't react, but her team noticed her silence was tighter than usual. At 9:48 p.m., her phone buzzed. A text from the internal whistleblower she'd spoken with days earlier. "They're prepping a tech white paper to discredit your protocol. I've seen the draft. They're twisting audit metadata to make it look like AI wasn't involved. Check version 3.1.9 on the training logs. That's where they buried the override code." Naomi immediately called Terrence. "Pull the 3.1.9 logs. Match against our flagged incident." An hour later, he called her back, voice shaking with clarity. "It's worse than we thought," he said. "They didn't just code the discrimination in. They installed a masking protocol to make it invisible during audits." Naomi stared into the darkness outside her window. "Then this isn't about a broken system," she said quietly. "This is about a conspiracy of silence built into the system's core." The next morning, Naomi walked into a federal briefing room in Washington, D.C., holding nothing but a black leather folder. Inside were 6 screenshots of override lines, 2 internal emails proving knowledge of masking behavior, and a 1-page memo titled "Behavioral Laundering: The Ethics Evasion of Modern Banking AIs." She handed it to the regulators without a single word. They read. They didn't ask her to speak. She didn't have to. The data spoke louder than any press release ever could. By 3 p.m., every major bank in the 87 network system received a joint notice from the Federal Ethics Compliance Division. All institutions connected to the Langston Ethics Trigger Protocol are required to undergo full AI system transparency audits within 21 business days. Non-compliance will result in federal funding disqualification and investor exposure. A tremor ran through Wall Street. But in her office in Austin, Naomi wasn't celebrating. She was doing what she always did, preparing for the next move. Because when you tear down a wall this big, you don't just clean up the debris. You lay the blueprint for something better. On a quiet Monday morning, Naomi Langston woke up to an unexpected notification on her private ethics dashboard. Flag code 7B Omega. Unauthorized AI mod detected. VaultTrust Bank. Compliance status: breach. She stared at it for a second, blinked, then exhaled through her nose, not surprised, not shocked, just disappointed. Because VaultTrust had been one of the banks that smiled in the public forums. That issued a press release claiming to stand with ethical reform. That even offered to partner on Langston's framework. And yet, here it was, caught red-handed. Inside VaultTrust's tech bunker in New Jersey, 2 engineers were sweating over lines of code. "Did you encrypt the redirect fast enough?" one asked, eyes darting across 6 screens. "I thought I did," the other muttered. "But I forgot the timestamp masking layer. Langston's system must have picked it up." The room went silent. They knew what that meant. Protocol Omega would be triggered. And if that happened, the consequences wouldn't stop at them. It would wipe clean access to ESG funds, lock AI authorization certificates, and freeze real-time investor confidence scores. Basically, they'd be shut out of the global banking system in less than 12 hours. Back in Austin, Naomi poured her coffee slowly, deliberately. Her assistant, Camilla, entered with wide eyes. "Did you see the trigger alert?" Naomi nodded. "I've seen it." "What now?" Naomi glanced at the wall, where a framed document hung behind her desk. It was the original EthicaLedger charter. Beneath it, in small print, was a single line. Protocol Omega may only be used in case of deliberate systemic evasion during or after formal compliance notification. And VaultTrust just crossed the line. Naomi sat down, opened her laptop, and pulled up the Omega activation panel. It was buried behind 5 layers of encryption, biometric access, and a digital ethics confirmation. She hesitated, just for a second. Not because she was unsure, but because she knew what this would do. It wouldn't just punish VaultTrust, it would rattle the entire banking infrastructure. But then she remembered. They made her wait outside, and they didn't stop there. They tried to rewrite the rules once she stepped back in. Naomi pressed her thumb to the scanner. Protocol Omega activated. 0711 AM ET. VaultTrust headquarters phone started ringing. Emails failed to send. Investor dashboard showed ethics non-compliant in red. 26 partner institutions received immediate alerts to suspend cooperation. 4 payment platforms cut transaction access. The chain reaction was instant. A junior compliance officer screamed across the hallway, "We just lost real-time credit verification!" The head of global risk stormed into the boardroom. "Who triggered Omega? How did we even get flagged?" No one had answers. Because the problem wasn't in the audit department. It was baked into their arrogance. 8:30 a.m. Media outlets caught wind. Telltales started trending. Langston system triggers emergency protocol. VaultTrust under fire. 42 million in assets exposed to ethics breach. The day the algorithm fought back. On Twitter, someone posted a clip of Naomi walking calmly into the ethics committee hearing 2 weeks earlier with the caption, "They made her wait outside. Now she has the master key." By noon, the panic spread. 6 other banks reached out proactively, asking to verify their AI models. 3 asked Naomi for immediate consultation. 1 CEO called her directly. "Naomi, I want to be clear. We didn't touch anything. Please don't flag us." Naomi didn't respond with threats. She simply said, "Then you won't have a problem opening your logs to public audit, will you?" Silence. Then, "We'll be in touch." Meanwhile, Naomi's team had gathered in the strategy room. Camilla walked in, holding a file. "You need to see this." Inside were whistleblower screenshots, internal VaultTrust messages where senior leadership joked about dodging the Langston lens. Another line read, "She's building a social credit system. We'll run circles around it with our old routing tools." Naomi read the message, said nothing. Then, finally, "They still think this is about me." Terrence looked up. "It's not?" Naomi shook her head slowly. "It's about the clients they thought no one would believe. The ones who didn't have a billion-dollar system watching out for them. Now they do." That evening, federal regulators sent out an official compliance escalation memo, citing Langston's activation of Protocol Omega. The FAA equivalent in the banking world, the National Ethics Finance Commission, was forced to issue suspension notices for VaultTrust across 31 states. By 6 p.m., VaultTrust's stock dropped 18%. By midnight, it was removed from 3 ESG fund portfolios. By the next morning, they lost 3.7 billion in future contracts. But Naomi wasn't celebrating, because the point wasn't destruction, it was exposure. At 11:12 p.m., Naomi sat alone in her study, the house quiet. She opened her private notes, typed 1 line. "When they weaponized systems to make people disappear, we built systems that made the truth impossible to hide." Then she shut the laptop, took a breath, because the next day would bring new resistance, new tactics, new noise. But Protocol Omega had already done its job. It proved one thing to every boardroom still pretending not to see. The era of untraceable bias was over. The reckoning had become code. 3 days after VaultTrust collapsed under Protocol Omega, a storm was already brewing. Not in the US, but across the Atlantic. In a quiet corner of Luxembourg, ValonBank executives were locked in a private crisis meeting. They were furious, not because they were guilty, But because they just realized Naomi's audit model had been licensed by their own ESG partner in Germany without their knowledge. And that meant any flagged data inside their EU operations could eventually surface through EthicaLedger. One board member slammed the table. "We need to act before this woman puts our systems in the spotlight." Another chimed in. "If we don't challenge her now, she'll drag the entire European network into this moral circus." That was when their lead counsel leaned forward with a smirk. "Then we take her to court." Naomi was in the middle of reviewing a new compliance framework for West African fintech banks when she got the alert. Notice of International Litigation Intent, EU Court of Justice, filed by ValonBank Group SA. Camilla stormed into her office 2 minutes later. "Are they serious? They're suing you for exposing discrimination?" Naomi didn't flinch. She closed her laptop, looked up. "They're not suing me. They're suing the idea that accountability can travel across borders." By the next morning, headlines swirled. European bank sues Langston over ethics protocol. Is global banking ready for a black woman's system of accountability? What happens when ethics become exportable? Some called it a desperate move. Others called it brave. But Naomi knew what it was, a warning shot. They wanted to test her reach, to see if she'd buckle under pressure on the international stage. What they didn't realize was this. Naomi had built EthicaLedger to withstand exactly this kind of retaliation. She called her team into the strategy room. Terrence looked pale. "They're going to argue that your audits violate privacy laws." Naomi nodded. "Then we'll remind the court. Discrimination isn't private data, it's public harm." That night, Naomi received a message from a German ethics researcher. ValonBank used facial recognition filtering in 5 of their youth credit programs. Black applicants were deprioritized. I have the metadata. Attached, a spreadsheet. Unencrypted, untouched, devastating. Naomi stared at the numbers. Thousands of names. Color-coded risk scores, all tied to demographic markers. None tied to actual credit history. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She simply whispered, "They thought geography would protect them, but justice isn't regional anymore." The next morning, Naomi held a press conference in front of a modest podium at her Austin office. She didn't bring lawyers. She didn't bring PR consultants. She brought one document and one message. To ValonBank and others who fear transparency, you don't fear EthicaLedger because it's flawed. You fear it because it works. And now, it works globally. She paused. You brought this to court. So, let's try this in the court of public truth. Then she held up the document. A bound, 37-page report titled, Beyond Borders, Racial Profiling in Cross-Continental Credit Systems. On the cover, a heat map of data trails across 11 countries. Every line traced back to banks licensing AI from the same 3 vendors. The press fell silent. Until one reporter asked, "Are you releasing the full report?" Naomi looked directly into the cameras. "Yes, and I'm not releasing it to the press. I'm releasing it to the people who've been denied, delayed, and deleted." Within 6 hours, the report went viral. By midnight, Halted Langston Leaks was trending in 17 countries. Former clients shared their stories. One woman in Nigeria posted, "Denied twice by ValonBank for a business loan. Now I know why. I was never risky. I was invisible." In Spain, regulators called for an emergency ethics review. In Canada, 2 AI vendors announced a pause in all bank tech rollouts pending audit. And in Brussels, Parliament scheduled a debate on whether to standardize data ethics laws across the EU, citing Naomi Langston's report as the catalyst. Meanwhile, ValonBank's legal team panicked. They hadn't expected this level of backlash. They'd hoped to corner Naomi into silence, not hand her the world's microphone. Their own junior analyst leaked a memo. The lawsuit was meant to slow her down, but it turned her into a movement. Back in Austin, Camilla entered Naomi's office with an odd expression. "You need to see this." She handed Naomi a phone. On it, a short video clip from the EU Commissioner for Ethics and Finance. "We believe Ms. Langston's system may serve as the foundation for a new ethics protocol for cross-border banking. We invite her to consult with our committee next month." Naomi blinked, exhaled slowly. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself a small smile, not a smug one, a tired one. Later that night, as the city slept and the news kept spinning, Naomi wrote quietly in her private journal. "They tried to exile accountability into the shadows of sovereignty, but truth finds its own passport, and sometimes it flies business class." She closed the journal, because the fight wasn't over, but it had shifted. Naomi was no longer just defending her system. She was redesigning what the system meant on a global scale. The cobblestone streets of Brussels were quiet that morning, blanketed by a soft gray fog. Inside the European Commission ethics chamber, however, there was nothing soft about the mood. The air crackled with tension. Cameras were already lined up. Analysts, CEOs, politicians, all crammed into a room usually reserved for closed-door diplomacy. At the center of it all sat one empty chair. Nameplate, Naomi Langston. One of the moderators whispered, "Do we even know if she's coming?" "She confirmed last night," another replied. "But no press, no entourage." The door clicked open, and there she was, alone, wearing a simple navy suit, hair pulled back, no makeup, no fanfare. Just that steady, unreadable look, the kind that told you she didn't come for applause. She came to finish something. The committee began with their usual tone. Neutral, polished, thinly veiled skepticism. "Ms. Langston," one commissioner began, "we appreciate your willingness to appear before us. However, we must express concern over the reach of your system. Some are calling EthicaLedger extrajudicial." Naomi didn't blink. "You're worried it works without permission." Another commissioner leaned forward. "We're worried it works without accountability." Naomi calmly opened the folder in front of her. Inside, hard copies of 3 case studies, one from the Netherlands, one from Portugal, one from France. All showed identical behavior. Banks using proxy algorithms to filter clients by race, religion, or nationality, and flagging them as high risk under terms like urban volatility or sociocultural friction. She slid them across the table. "You asked about accountability. Here it is. What you call reach, my clients call visibility. What you call overstep, we call documentation." Silence. The moderator nodded, uneasy. "Let's proceed." 30 minutes into the session, the tension cracked. A British delegate spoke up. "We believe there should be an industry-led internal oversight group to monitor your protocol, preferably chaired by a neutral third-party bank alliance." Naomi smiled, the kind that made everyone sit straighter. "You want the very people being exposed to decide which parts of themselves are visible." "No." A stir rippled across the room. Another delegate from Hungary raised a hand. "You're proposing to regulate us from outside. That's digital colonization, Ms. Langston." Naomi leaned in slightly, voice calm but sharp. "Colonization is when you take without consent. EthicaLedger only reveals what you already did, with no one watching. The era of secrets wrapped in sovereignty is over." Then she stood up, walked to the center of the floor. "You don't need to trust me. That's the point. I'm not asking you to give me control. I'm returning it to the people." She pulled out a sleek black tablet and tapped the screen. "Today, I'm releasing EthicaLedger v3.0. This version no longer belongs to me. It belongs to the users." A large screen lit up behind her, revealing a new dashboard. One designed not for banks, but for everyday clients. Real-time credit transparency, audit trail tracking, ethics scoring of institutions, anonymized discrimination alert logs. No more hidden denials, no more vanishing applications, no more, "Sorry, the system flagged you." Someone in the crowd whispered, "She just turned banking ethics into a consumer right." A German fintech CEO muttered, "If this gets adopted, we're going to have to rebuild our entire onboarding systems." A French investment chair hissed, "She's not asking us to change. She's forcing it." But the public, watching from across the globe, saw something different. They saw a woman walk into the lion's den with no roar, just truth. By midday, clips from the hearing were everywhere. You want the people you hid from to monitor their own invisibility. The era of untraceable bias is over. I'm not building a system, I'm building a mirror. On social media, the phrase trended globally, the mirror system. That night, Naomi walked out of the commission building into the cold Brussels air. Camilla was waiting by the car. How'd it go? Naomi smirked, exhausted. They wanted to tell me I went too far. I showed them the line was already crossed. By them. She paused. Now we just made it visible. Back in Austin, the EthicaLedger v3.0 platform went live. Within 48 hours, 1.4 million users registered for ethics alerts. 900+ institutions were flagged for legacy denial patterns. 17 banks issued public statements of alignment, all carefully worded, none admitting guilt. And in a quiet Zoom call between regulators from Canada, Kenya, Brazil, and South Korea, a conversation began about forming the Global Ethics Accountability Network, GAN, a watchdog body with one common data source, EthicaLedger. Late that night, Naomi sat on her back porch. No laptop, no files, just her journal. She wrote, "They made me wait outside, so I built the front door. And now I hold the keys." It started on a Wednesday morning. BuzzFeed Finance posted a leaked image of a supposedly internal EthicaLedger dashboard. On the screen, 2 names were highlighted, both listed as high risk due to race-based traits. The implication? EthicaLedger, the very system built to fight bias, was itself engaging in bias. Within 30 minutes, 3 more outlets picked up the headline. EthicaLedger flags black users as high risk? Is Langston's mirror just another distorted lens? Naomi was in the middle of a video call with a Kenyan development bank when Camilla burst in, pale-faced, phone in hand. "You need to see this, now!" Naomi read the article in silence, then again, then a third time. She looked up. "It's fake. The font's wrong. That's not our dashboard layer. And we don't even use traits in classification." But the internet didn't wait for proof. By noon, the story had gone viral. That evening, Naomi stood in front of her team in the command center, a sunlit co-working space in downtown Austin that now looked like a war room. Terrence projected the images onto the main screen. This wasn't sloppy. Whoever forged this knew our design language, our color codes, even our naming structure from version 2.1. Naomi crossed her arms, thinking aloud. This isn't a random smear. It's a planted discreditation, just technical enough to scare regulators, just vague enough to confuse the public. Camilla added, "The story doesn't need to be real. It just needs to make people pause." Naomi's gaze hardened. "Then we won't pause. We investigate. We trace the leak. And when we find it, we make the truth louder than their lie." That night, she initiated Protocol Redline, a silent tool built deep into EthicaLedger's infrastructure, meant to activate only in case of internal sabotage, ethical data breach, or coordinated disinformation. It didn't just analyze code. It monitored metadata chains, who accessed what, when, and how deep. At 2:12 a.m., the system pinged a hit. One access log, one email, one trace route to a proxy server in Zurich. Rerouted through a dead shell company, which, upon further digging, was linked to a digital compliance firm, Neo-Axis Solutions, that had previously bid for EthicaLedger's back-end contract and lost. Terrence stared at the result. "They've been trying to undercut us since January." But Naomi wasn't interested in them. She was interested in who paid them. 2 more layers down the trail, Camilla cracked the paper. Neo-Axis received a private wire transfer from Concord Fidelity Group, a trust firm based in the Caymans. Naomi frowned. That name rang a bell. She pulled up her old records. Ethics evaluation rejections, compliance denials. Concord had appeared in at least 5 flagged audits from 2023. One of their primary banking partners? VaultTrust. Naomi's jaw clenched. "The ones I shut down." This is payback. But that wasn't the worst of it, because Concord's largest stakeholder, according to their own filings, was Morrison Wells Capital, a hedge fund, one that happened to control indirect shares in 29 banks that EthicaLedger downgraded. Naomi sat back, eyes narrowing. They weren't just angry, they were terrified. They're trying to kill the system because they know it works. The next morning, Naomi stepped onto the Langston HQ rooftop and recorded a direct-to-audience message. No cuts, no edits, just truth. They want you to believe this system failed. But here's the part they didn't expect. This system is designed to detect its own wounds. She held up a report. This forged dashboard was planted, it was traced, and now we know exactly who did it. Morrison Wells, VaultTrust, NeoAxis, you didn't just come after me, you came after the people this platform protects. Then she looked straight into the camera. I won't sue you, I won't beg regulators, I'll let your own data do the damage. Redline protocol is now live, and it's about to change the entire landscape. Within 48 hours, Redline protocol exposed 17 hidden partnerships between banks and discriminatory data vendors. EthicaLedger updated public profiles with red flag warnings next to flagged institutions, instantly visible to 2.7 million users. Several banks saw a 19% drop in application volume overnight. The ripple reached Wall Street. One anchor on CNBC muttered, "You know how bad this is? A tech ethics system just moved the market." At the same time, something else happened. A former NeoAxis employee, anonymous, via burner email, sent Naomi a final piece of the puzzle, an internal deck titled Operation Collapse: How to End EthicaLedger's Public Credibility by Q4. The document laid out a 6-stage plan, including fabricated dashboards, fake user testimonials, rogue influencer amplification, exploiting GDPR gray zones, coordinated regulator pressure. Naomi didn't blink. She forwarded the deck to every financial journalist on her blacklist, those who'd called her arrogant, radical, or dangerously ambitious. Then she added a note. Here's what your sources have been building behind your back. Over the next 72 hours, every major outlet ran headlines like, "Coordinated conspiracy unmasked against Black CEO's ethics platform. Whistleblower confirms multi-bank sabotage plan. Redline protocol crushes campaign to destroy financial transparency." The public turned. The anger turned. And for the first time in 3 weeks, the conversation turned. From whether Naomi had gone too far, to whether the industry had finally been caught doing exactly what she warned about. Camilla walked into Naomi's office that Friday with a quiet expression. "You won." Naomi looked up from her laptop. "No." She turned the screen toward Camilla. On it was the EthicaLedger user map, now active in 41 countries with 3.9 million users. "We did." That night, Naomi sat alone in the rooftop garden of her building. She looked up at the stars, took a long breath, and wrote one more line in her journal. "They tried to bury the system with lies, but I built it to bleed truth, and the world heard it scream." The capital felt colder than Naomi remembered. Even in the height of spring, the white marble steps seemed to reflect more than just sunlight. They reflected pressure, scrutiny, and a history that had never fully welcomed people who looked like her into rooms like this. Inside, the House Committee on Financial Accountability and Innovation had already filled up. Reporters lined the back walls. Staffers whispered. Cameras rolled. The chair banged his gavel. Today's hearing will address the ethical oversight and governance implications of independent digital platforms affecting federal financial systems. Our witness, Ms. Naomi Langston, CEO and founder of EthicaLedger. Naomi stood, unshaken. She walked up to the lone microphone, placed her notes down, and looked at the 17 committee members staring at her like she was either a threat or a revolution. "Good morning. My name is Naomi Langston. I'm the daughter of a Black teacher and a postal worker. I was told ethics would make me respected. Turns out, it made me dangerous." She paused. "Let's begin." The first half of the hearing was sharp. Lawmakers peppered her with loaded questions. Who elected you to define ethical standards? What gives EthicaLedger the right to impact credit markets? How do we know this won't turn into a surveillance tool? Naomi didn't flinch. No one elected me, but no one stopped the banks from raiding us in silence either. EthicaLedger doesn't change credit. It exposes the conditions that create unequal credit. And as for surveillance, we audit institutions, not people. That drew murmurs. One congresswoman nodded discreetly. The audience was listening now. But then came the pivot. Representative Caldwell, gray-haired, Texas drawl, Wall Street donor list longer than a CVS receipt, leaned into his mic. You say this system helps people, but you froze $1.2 billion overnight. That's power without accountability. Naomi calmly leaned forward. No, sir. That's accountability finally getting power. She turned to face the full panel. For decades, Black families were denied loans with no explanation. For decades, women were flagged as financial liabilities just for being divorced. For decades, applicants with ethnic names mysteriously didn't qualify. No data, no recourse, just a quiet no. You're not mad that EthicaLedger made decisions. You're mad it made visible the ones you never had to explain. Dead silence. One reporter whispered under their breath, "That's going viral." Naomi clicked a small remote, and behind her, a screen lit up with 4 faces. Not executives. Ordinary people. A Latina nurse who'd been rejected 5 times for a mortgage until she used EthicaLedger to flag a discriminatory bank and got her approval. A single father in Atlanta who finally learned why his small business line kept getting denied and used the platform's audit request to trigger a policy change. A Muslim engineer whose citizenship status had been incorrectly listed as pending risk, causing months of credit delay, corrected within hours after EthicaLedger exposure. A retired veteran whose VA home loan was blocked until he filed a public ethics review using Naomi's platform. This system doesn't take power from the people, it returns it. Then she did something unexpected. She slid forward a draft policy document. The Public Ethics Infrastructure Act. Murmurs swept the room. "I'm not just here to defend EthicaLedger," she said. "I'm here to offer you the next step." She walked them through it. A federal framework for ethics transparency scores, applied to all banks receiving federal support. A nationwide portal for citizens to file ethics-based loan denials for review. Mandatory bias testing on AI-driven loan algorithms, audited annually. Creation of a federal office of financial ethics, independent from the SEC, with oversight over both public and private institutions. The committee chair raised an eyebrow. "And who oversees this new ethics body?" Naomi smiled. "We do. The people you once made wait outside." After 3 hours, the hearing ended. But the room didn't empty quickly. One by one, lawmakers approached Naomi privately. Some offered cautious praise. Some asked for early access to the draft legislation. One even asked bluntly if she'd consider leading a federal task force. Naomi just thanked them, politely, but with distance. "I didn't build this to be absorbed. I built it to be seen." Outside the building, reporters swarmed. "Ms. Langston, how do you respond to calls that EthicaLedger is becoming too powerful?" She stopped, turned to face the crowd. "Power with visibility is accountability. Power in the dark is corruption." Another reporter shouted, "What happens if Congress rejects your bill?" Naomi didn't miss a beat. "Then we'll pass it in practice. Because the public already acts like this is law. We're just asking the system to catch up." That night, C-SPAN aired her entire testimony uninterrupted. Clips went viral on TikTok, Twitter, YouTube. The most played? "You're not mad we made decisions. You're mad we made yours visible." Telltales channels across the world picked up the story. Some dubbed her the ethics architect. Others called her the systems reckoning. But Naomi didn't care about the labels. She cared about what happened next. 3 days later, the White House chief of staff reached out privately. The president had watched the hearing. He wanted to meet. Naomi stared at the message for a long moment. Then texted Camilla. "It's happening. We're not guests anymore. We're architects." The Oval Office was quieter than Naomi expected. No press, no cameras, just a few aides outside the door, and the soft hum of DC morning traffic bleeding in through bulletproof glass. The president stood as she entered, not just out of courtesy, but something closer to respect. "Naomi Langston," he said, extending a hand. "Your reputation precedes you." Naomi took his hand, but didn't smile. "I'm not here for reputation," she said calmly. "I'm here for what comes next." They sat. No notes, no legal team, just 2 chairs, a coffee table, and 2 cups of something hot that neither touched. "I'll get straight to it," the president said. "We want to bring EthicaLedger under federal protection, make it part of our public infrastructure. You'd retain leadership, of course, but under a national charter." Naomi studied him, measured, then asked, "Why now?" He exhaled. "Because your hearing was bigger than politics, bigger than regulation. It made people ask if ethics should be a right, not just a request." Naomi nodded slowly. "You're not wrong, but let me be clear. This system wasn't built to be adopted quietly. It was built to expose the quiet." She reached into her leather folder and pulled out a slim document. Just 3 pages. "The People's Ethics Protocol." She slid it across the table. The president skimmed the first line aloud. "The government shall not own, alter, nor monetize any part of the EthicaLedger system without the public's elected oversight." He looked up. "This is a binding conditions charter." Naomi nodded. "Exactly. If EthicaLedger is to become public infrastructure, it needs to be protected like public memory. No backdoors, no secret edits, no updates without transparency. This isn't a software deal. It's a civil right." For a long moment, the president said nothing. Then, finally, he leaned back and said with a small grin, "You know, we brought in 3 different cybersecurity analysts to try and find a vulnerability in your system. And they couldn't." Naomi didn't flinch. "Because ethics isn't just code, it's structure, and we built ours to be seen." By the end of the meeting, the 2 reached a simple agreement. EthicaLedger would remain under independent civilian oversight. It would be protected by a federal ethics treaty, drafted by Naomi and ratified by a citizen panel. And it would be accessible, free, and unalterable without full disclosure. The president stood. "So you're not interested in power?" Naomi looked him in the eye. "I'm interested in systems. Power fades. Systems shape the world." That afternoon, she walked out of the West Wing to a sea of reporters. Flashes, shouts, microphones. One shouted, "Ms. Langston, are you handing EthicaLedger over to the government?" She paused, then said clearly, "EthicaLedger is not for sale, not for show. It is now a protected civic protocol, built by the people, owned by the people, and accountable to the people." Back in Austin, as the sun dipped low, Naomi returned to her porch. Camilla joined her with 2 glasses of wine. "So," Camilla asked, "you trust them?" Naomi shook her head. "I trust what we just wrote into history." She raised her glass. "To never waiting outside again." They clinked. If someone ever made you feel like you didn't belong, if you've ever been asked to wait outside while others walked right in, tell us, how would you rewrite that moment if you had the power? Drop your story in the comments. We read every one, and if this story moved you, share it. Someone out there might still be waiting outside, thinking they're alone. Don't forget to subscribe to Telltales, where the quiet ones finally get heard.